I'm here with Len and Nora from Jawbone Radio. Len and Nora, welcome to the Cauldron Netcast. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview.
The pleasure is mine.
Yes, the pleasure is all yours. Actually, thank you very much for having us.
We share equally in the pleasure.
So what gave you guys the idea of starting to do a netcast 221 episodes ago?
Nora, I think you'd be pretty good to answer that question.
I felt that it was my obligation as a responsible netizen to give back to the community. Either that or Len talked me into something I had no idea what he was talking about.
Yeah, I think
222 shows later, I have mixed feelings.
I think what ended up happening is I just sort of caught Nora before she went to bed. I said, "Nora, come up here. You got to see this." Invited her up to the attic office here, and I had all the a kind of rudimentary setup, and we started recording. And the very first show was probably about 20 minutes long, and us kind of worrying about our home inspector coming to our house and finding everything wrong, or and we were just working out some problems, and that became the genesis of the first show. And then
we still have problems, so the show is still going.
Yes, here we go.
How did you initially advertise and try to get the word out about your show, and when did you notice that it started to catch on with all kinds of listeners?
There was that voting forum.
Oh, yeah. What was that, Podcast Alley?
Yes.
Podcast Alley, we were all on there. That was a nice little podcast place that all these different podcasters were hanging out at. And then very quickly in there, iTunes picked up podcasts and got it. But I think for our show, just in general, what ended up happening is there were a couple things that I did. Well, the first thing was that we had a newspaper article by the Plain Dealer written about us very, very early on in the whole process. I mean, so early on that we had probably done maybe 4 shows. And then I went out of town for a little bit, and you called me from out of town and said, "Hey, Len, the Plain Dealer is on the phone. They want to do an interview with us about our show." And at that point, we were like, "Oh, what? This is like, who's even listening to this thing?" We were just kind of like, we were just doing this for the fun in our attic, and now somebody wants to do a little article about us. But what ended up happening is that article was on the front page, literally on the front page of the paper. It was under this big photo of Usher. And there was a camera crew came in, took pictures of us and stuff, and then that article got thrown all over the country. Like it got picked up by like a syndicate or something, and so we became like this face of podcasting for a couple different places. I know it got picked up down south and stuff like that. But then the other thing, because Nora, you don't really do a whole lot as far as
so you've had some pretty famous guests on your show. Who have been some of your favorites, and how did you get in contact with them to try to interview them?
Early on, I remember when we first started the show, we realized pretty quickly what a powerful tool this was, and like, wow, people really wanted to be a part of this whole podcasting thing. It was like a great time to strike because it was so new and everybody wanted to do it, and so everybody was like really digging either being on each other's shows or whatever, or getting guests and stuff like that because it was this new technology. So I remember early on what I did is I might even still have the list. I wrote down like people we'd want to have on the show, and I just sent emails to these people, and surprisingly, a lot of these people wrote back. The one guest, I think our favorite celebrity guest, I guess, I don't know, is maybe John Hodgman. I really enjoyed talking to him.
I hate to pick favorites, but I enjoyed interviewing Mike Nelson.
Mike Nelson, Bill Corbett, yeah, the Mystery Science Theater guys are always a lot of fun, and that was like really early on, like within the first couple months, I wrote to Mike, and Mike wrote me back, and we worked something out. It was really early, and the one that got away, or the one that we're still trying to get, that we got really a positive response on, was John and John from They Might Be Giants. We actually got an email back from them saying, "We'd love to be on your show."
I've also enjoyed the times that we've had co-hosts from Hometown Tales.
Yes. They're always good. I think one of my favorite, net celebrity interviews was. It's always good, to talk to Brian Ibbett. I like talking to Brian because he was like one of the first guys that was on our show as like a podcast guest, and we've become really good friends with him after that. And it's just he's great to have on. But he's like the great stand-up guy. But that's not I guess that's not the question you're asking. But he's just a great guy in podcasting to know. So anyway,
you've managed to build up an assortment of regular listeners and semi-regular listeners and callers from all over the country. How did they hear about the show, and what do you think attracts them to your program?
Well, I don't know how people find out about it. I don't really do a whole lot of research to figure out where people are coming from, but I'm guessing a lot of my listeners are coming from either Monster by Mail. They're just finding that out, or Jonathan Colton.
I think some of them are linked from other people's websites.
Yes, Extra Life. Extra Life is I'm usually a guest on there. Extra Life Radio with Scott Johnson. If I'm a guest on there, a lot of people who listen to the show are coming from Extra Life.
What are some of your future plans for the show, and what kind of guests that you do you have lined up that you'd like to talk about?
Well, our future plans for the show right now are just to do the show, and as far as guests go, they kind of crop up.
We're hoping to have Kevin Murphy to round out the triumvirate.
Yes, and I have made some friends with some other people that possibly could bring some other bigger names onto the show, but that remains to be seen, and I don't want to jinx anything by saying anything about it. But
why do you do this? Why do you feel the urge to connect to the internet on such a personal level, and such a regular schedule? You talk about your kids, your family, relatives, in-laws. Why do you do that?
I don't feel the urge to do that.
I don't know. Those
are two very different answers. My answer is I don't feel particularly an urge to do so.
But you kind of look at the show sometimes as like a time capsule, kind of.
I see there's a certain personal value I have in participating in the show, but I wouldn't say that I feel compelled to do the show. Well, I am compelled to do the show, but not by my own steam. Lenny compels me to do the show.
I don't really feel compelled to talk about, and there's a lot of stuff we don't talk about.
Right.
I mean, believe it or not.
That vacation upstate, That 6-year vacation you had. I mean,
there's a lot that we probably could talk about if we don't. So, it's kind of funny because a lot of people, I'll talk to people who listen to the show and they come up and they're like, "Wow, you guys are so open. You talk about everything," and I'm like, "You don't know.
You don't know the half of it." This guy, let me tell you,
there's a lot we don't talk about. So, and certainly a lot of times I think, "Wow, this would make really great show material," but it's not anything that some of the things I just think it's better to just leave it alone.
I have a harder time believing anybody's listening, which makes it less difficult for me.
But, let's go to the next one.
Recently, you were famous on the internet for starting the "What's the baby using" internet meme or internet popular saying. So tell me, what's the baby using?
What's the baby using?
25.
The baby's using 25. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for agreeing to sit down and do this interview, guys. Thank you.